A passenger jet is a nation in miniature. It carries its people across the world, a bubble of familiar life suspended over the clouds. On June 23, 1985, Air India Flight 182 was one such nation. It was a Boeing 747, a giant of the skies named Emperor Kanishka. It departed from Montreal, Canada, bound for London and then Delhi. The aircraft was full of families, children, and individuals heading home, or on holiday, or to visit relatives. They were suspended in the routine of a long-haul flight. The cabin lights were dimmed. The hum of the four massive engines was a constant, reassuring presence. Below them, the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly. It was a flight like any other, until it was not. The disappearance of Flight 182 from radar screens was sudden. There was no warning, no mayday call from the pilots, no sign of trouble. One moment the aircraft was a predictable blip on the air traffic control display over Ireland. The next, it was gone. This silence is the most chilling part of the story. An aircraft carrying 329 souls does not simply vanish. The abrupt end of its electronic signature spoke of a catastrophic event, something so swift and so violent that the crew had no time to react. The world would soon learn that this was not an accident born of mechanical failure or pilot error. It was an act of terror, a bomb detonated in the forward cargo hold that had ripped the aeroplane apart at 31,000 feet. This event became a landmark in the history of aviation. It was, at the time, the deadliest act of aviation terrorism the world had ever seen. The crash of Flight 182 was not merely a technical investigation into a failed machine. It became a sprawling criminal inquiry that would span continents and take decades. The story is not just about a fallen aircraft, but about the complexities of global politics, the failures of intelligence services, and the immense challenge of finding justice for the victims. It forced a fundamental rethinking of how airports and airlines protect their passengers from threats they cannot see, threats hidden inside an ordinary suitcase. The loss was profoundly personal for many communities, particularly in Canada and India. Of the 329 people on board, 268 were Canadian citizens, many of Indian origin. Another 27 were British, and 24 were Indian. The passenger list was a mosaic of lives intertwined: doctors, engineers, students, and grandparents. There were 86 children under the age of 12. Their stories, their plans, their futures, all were extinguished in an instant. The crash left a deep scar on the Canadian psyche, a tragic reminder of the country's vulnerability to global terrorism. The search for answers was not just a technical necessity, it was a moral imperative for the families left behind, who demanded to know how and why their loved ones were taken from them. The aircraft itself was a Boeing 747-237B, a majestic and reliable workhorse of the skies. Delivered to Air India in 1978, Emperor Kanishka was well-maintained and had a solid service record. It was a symbol of pride, connecting the Indian diaspora with their homeland. On its final journey, it was commanded by Captain Hansa Singh Narendra, an experienced pilot, assisted by First Officer Satwinder Singh Binder and Flight Engineer Dara Dumazia. The cockpit crew was highly competent, familiar with the aircraft and the transatlantic route. They were professionals going about their work, managing the complex systems of the jumbo jet, completely unaware of the lethal device ticking away below their feet in the cargo hold. The passengers were a cross-section of life. Families were returning to India for the summer holidays. Children were excited to see their grandparents. Professionals were traveling for work. For them, the flight began as any other. They checked in their luggage, went through security, and settled into their seats. The routine of air travel creates a sense of safety. The safety briefings, the cabin crew's calm demeanor, the gentle takeoff, it all builds a cocoon of normalcy. The bomb that would destroy their world was loaded onto the aircraft inside a suitcase, checked in by a passenger who never intended to board the flight. This simple, deceptive act breached the trust that underpins the entire system of air travel. The plan was meticulously designed to evade detection. The bomb was placed in a bag at Vancouver International Airport and checked onto a Canadian Pacific Airlines flight to Toronto. In Toronto, it was transferred to Air India Flight 182. The passenger who checked the bag, a man using a false name, never boarded. This was a critical security loophole. At the time, it was not standard practice for airlines to ensure that every checked bag belonged to a passenger who was actually on the plane. The system was built on an assumption of good faith that was tragically exploited. The bag, containing the explosive device, was just another piece of luggage in a cargo hold filled with the belongings of hundreds of innocent people. As Flight 182 cruised high above the Atlantic, the atmosphere inside the cabin would have been calm. Many passengers would have been asleep, others might have been watching a film or reading a book. The cabin crew would be moving through the aisles, attending to needs, their movements practiced and reassuring. It was the middle of the night, a quiet time on a long journey. This period of peace makes the subsequent violence all the more horrifying. The passengers and crew were suspended between two worlds, unaware that their journey was about to end in the most brutal way imaginable. They were victims of a conflict they had no part in, their lives sacrificed for a political cause far removed from their own reality. The explosion happened without warning. At 7:14 Coordinated Universal Time, the bomb detonated in the forward cargo compartment. The force of the blast was immense. It instantly tore a large hole in the fuselage, the aircraft's outer skin. This caused explosive decompression. The air inside the pressurized cabin, held at a comfortable, breathable pressure, rushed out into the thin, cold atmosphere of 31,000 feet. The sudden change in pressure would have created a deafening roar and a violent, disorienting fog as moisture in the air condensed. The structure of the giant Boeing 747, an engineering marvel, began to fail catastrophically. The aircraft did not simply fall from the sky, it was torn apart. The initial explosion and decompression severely damaged the plane's control systems. The electrical and hydraulic lines that allow the pilots to steer the aircraft were likely severed almost immediately. The pilots in the cockpit would have had no time to understand what was happening, let alone control the dying machine. The tail section of the 747, including the horizontal and vertical stabilizers crucial for stable flight, broke away from the main body of the fuselage. Without its tail, the aircraft became utterly uncontrollable, tumbling through the air as it began its long descent towards the ocean. For the people on board, the final moments are unimaginable. The sudden violence of the decompression would have been terrifying. The aircraft would have pitched and rolled wildly, subjected to aerodynamic forces it was never designed to withstand. The structural integrity of the fuselage would have continued to disintegrate during the fall, with large sections peeling away. The descent from 31,000 feet would have taken several minutes. It was a long, terrifying fall into the cold, dark sea. The wreckage, when it was eventually found, was scattered over a wide area of the ocean floor, a testament to the fact that the aircraft had broken up at a high altitude. The aircraft struck the water with enormous force. The impact would have destroyed what was left of the fuselage, scattering debris and the victims over a large expanse of the Atlantic. From the perspective of air traffic controllers, the flight had simply vanished from their screens. The primary radar return disappeared, followed seconds later by the secondary return which transmits the aircraft's identity and altitude. This electronic silence was the only immediate evidence of the catastrophe. The search and rescue operation that was launched found only floating wreckage and bodies. There were no survivors. The silence on the radio was absolute, a final chilling testament to the speed and finality of the event. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex in aviation history. It was a dual effort, a technical investigation to determine the cause of the crash, and a criminal investigation to find the perpetrators. The first challenge was to recover the wreckage from the deep ocean. The main pieces of the aircraft lay on the seabed, 2 kilometers beneath the surface of the Atlantic. The Irish Naval Service located the general area of the wreckage using sonar, but recovering it required specialized equipment. A French cable-laying ship with a remotely operated vehicle called Scarab was brought in to survey the debris field and retrieve key components, including the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. These black boxes were crucial. They were found and brought to the surface, offering the first real clues. The flight data recorder, which tracks the aircraft's systems and movements, stopped abruptly. This confirmed that the event was sudden and catastrophic. More telling was the cockpit voice recorder. It captured the sound of the explosion, a sharp, loud noise, followed by the immediate sound of the aircraft breaking apart. Then, silence. The recording proved that the crew had no time to react. The nature of the sound, combined with the instantaneous failure of all systems, pointed investigators away from mechanical failure and strongly towards a bomb. The physical evidence recovered from the ocean confirmed the bomb theory. Investigators meticulously examined every piece of retrieved wreckage. They found pitting and cratering on pieces of the fuselage skin from the forward cargo hold, characteristic signs of a high-energy explosion. Chemical analysis of these fragments revealed traces of explosives. Crucially, they found pieces of a radio and a battery that were not part of the aircraft's standard equipment. These components were identified as parts of the bomb's trigger mechanism. The puzzle was coming together, piece by piece, from the depths of the ocean. The evidence was clear. Flight 182 was brought down by a deliberately placed explosive device. While the technical investigation was making progress, the criminal inquiry was also underway. It was a massive international effort, led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The investigation focused on Sikh extremist groups operating in Canada who were seeking revenge against the Indian government. Investigators traced the suitcase with the bomb back to its origin in Vancouver. They uncovered the network of individuals involved in purchasing the components, building the device, and checking the bag onto the flight. However, the path to justice was fraught with difficulties, including the loss of key evidence and the challenges of prosecuting a crime planned across multiple jurisdictions, leading to a trial that took many years and ended with a controversial acquittal. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 was a wake-up call for the global aviation industry. It exposed a critical vulnerability in airport security, the possibility of checking in a bag without boarding the flight. Before 1985, this practice, known as checking in unaccompanied baggage, was not universally prohibited. Airlines and airports operated on a level of trust that the bombers exploited. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, aviation authorities around the world moved swiftly to close this loophole. The principle of passenger baggage reconciliation became a mandatory international standard. Today, airlines must ensure that every piece of checked luggage belongs to a passenger who is physically on the aircraft. This was just the beginning of a security overhaul. The disaster highlighted the need for more advanced technology to screen checked luggage for explosives. At the time, screening was primarily focused on carry-on items, and X-ray machines were not sophisticated enough to reliably detect plastic explosives. The bombing spurred massive investment in research and development for new explosive detection systems. Modern airports are now equipped with complex, multi-layered screening processes for all checked bags, using advanced imaging technology and chemical sniffers to identify potential threats. This layered approach, now standard practice, is a direct legacy of the vulnerabilities revealed by Flight 182. The investigation also led to profound changes in how air crash investigations and counterterrorism operations are conducted. The sheer scale and complexity of the Air India inquiry, spanning multiple countries and lasting for decades, provided hard-won lessons in international cooperation. It underscored the importance of preserving evidence and the need for better communication between intelligence agencies and law enforcement. A Canadian public inquiry into the bombing later concluded that a cascading series of errors by government agencies allowed the attack to happen. This led to reforms aimed at improving how security intelligence is shared and acted upon to prevent future tragedies. The most enduring legacy of Flight 182 is a human one. It is a story of immense loss and the long, painful search for accountability. The crash serves as a permanent, solemn reminder of the human cost of terrorism. Memorials in Canada and Ireland stand as quiet tributes to the 329 lives that were lost. For the families, the lessons are not about security protocols or investigative techniques, but about memory and justice. The bombing of Flight 182 changed the way we fly, forcing the world to accept that the threat of terrorism is real and requires constant vigilance. The safety measures we now take for granted at every airport are, in part, a legacy written in the ruin of Emperor Kanishka.